Hi, and welcome back to Trusted Voices. We're here with Chief Alan Brunancini, the godfather of the fire service. And thank you for joining us. We moved to the tailboard for a little tailboard talk. We were sitting on the front bumper for a while, watching the traffic go by, and we're in Phoenix, Arizona. And this huge yellow ball of heat was beating down on us and messing up our photographer's stuff. So we said, hell, the tailboards were the greatest conversations in the fire service. We have solved every problem in the history of mankind sitting right here. So we figured we'd move to the back to the tailboard, and because we're old, we brought our chairs.
That's right.
So I'm not going to sit on the tailboard any longer and talk. But I want to talk to the Chief. You know, the Chief's career spanning from starting in 1958 and continuing today, being one of there's a great book out, just came out, that I was reading again last night. I couldn't put it down. It's a good book, The Originals. Great read. But the Chief is one of the originals in the fire service. A lot of our significant evolutionary advances that I think have improved the fire service dramatically, you know, happened on your watch. So what, if you had to sit back and reflect back from 58 to today, what do you think the most significant things that you were involved with were, and what do you think the most significant things were?
You know, one of them that I have thought about, and maybe you do this when you get old, is, and I mentioned it earlier, is I was lucky because I was involved in the period of the fire service where we developed a lot of the programs we have today. We did EMS, we did special operations, things like hazmat and special rescue things, high angle, low angle, swift water, all the special ops stuff, confined space. We did incident command, we did safety, we did public education, and we did it all with exactly the same workforce. And sometimes I think we don't really pay very much attention to that, is that we took the group of firefighters in the American Fire Service, and we trained those people to do a whole series of new activities. And by and large, we never had a trainer say that these students, these firefighter students, were capable and qualified enough to do what the new service was. And I think that's to me, I think that's an enormous compliment to the human resource part of the American Fire Service. And we were actively involved in it because we were growing. We were in a place that was pretty progressive. The city had a lot of resources, particularly during the development period. So we had access to a lot of those opportunities, and we were lucky because we took those opportunities. And again, I never had anybody saying, "Well, can't do it today, Chief. Why? They ain't smart enough, or they don't attend, or they're too poorly behaved," or whatever word you wanted to use that would describe their qualifications and suitability. They said, "Yeah, no problem." Now, sometimes it took a little longer to train somebody just based on their personal characteristics and profile and so on, but they never said. I asked a gal who did our EMS training, I said, what's the quickest you ever trained a Phoenix firefighter to do IV therapy? She said, 4 hours. I said, what was the longest? She said, 22 hours. I said, could the 4-hour guy do it better than the 22-hour guy? She says, no, once they got it, they got it. They were just, when they got it, they were fine. They were doing fine. I said, what'd you change? She said, we didn't bore the 4-hour guy for 18 hours. I thought, that's actually pretty smart. Yeah. But she says, you've never sent us a firefighter that we couldn't train to be a paramedic. What an asset in a service or a department or an organization to say, whatever we want to do, people take it on and do it, the process. I mean, we never went out and recruited. I mean, we recruited a lot of special people. And inside that workforce, if you look at the special skills that the individuals have, there damn near isn't anything you can't do. I mean, when you look at the profile of the people in the system, when you look at firefighters, You take 100 firefighters, and that 100 firefighters is almost every occupation, every activity, every interest, every capability that you can imagine. And you're thinking, why don't we take more of an advantage of that in the process? I think another thing in that, and those are the humans inside the system, I think that we have developed, I think, a better sense of deliverance service and living with the humans outside the service, and we've called that customer service.
That's what I was going to say.
And I think that perspective for us was the easiest. I won't even call it a change. I think it was more of an awareness than a change. It was probably the easiest thing we ever did was simply to tell the existing workforce, be nice. And they said, okay, let's eat. It was no big deal, honestly.
Well, nothing really changed.
It didn't. You know what changed? The bosses changed.
Yeah.
We authorized them to do what their mothers taught them to do.
Right.
We said, go do it, just do it. And we call it empowerment or whatever modern word you want to attach to it, and say, if it's legal and ethical and nice and safe and all those kinds of things, don't ask for permission, just do it. And we have described that as added value. To say you can do a little bit extra for somebody and you're authorized. In fact, we would like to require you to do that in the process because it has such a positive effect just in the community in general. In other words, individually with that family or that person or the Withams, the people who come with them, or whatever, in their memory. But when you look at the effect of that in the community, and I saw that in an initiative here, and you would hear people in the system, it made you happy and proud, and they said, you know, Phoenix firefighters will do anything for the customers.
Well, I think that's a natural tendency in the firefighter.
Yeah, it was the easiest change we ever made.
My wife, who's watched us for 40 years,
Yeah.
50 years, do this, and our talk, she would say, well, you're dealing with people who love people, so it's easy for you guys. And I said, what do you mean by that? Because she'd worked in some hospital systems, and she goes, every time I'm around firefighters, I notice two things. They introduce themselves to everybody, and they seem interested in everybody. And that's pretty much a pretty universal characteristic.
That ain't a bad beginning.
That ain't a bad
relationship.
Beginning. Yeah, you know. But you watch us. I mean, last night you talk to the hostess, you talk to the waiter, you talk to the. We just seem to be gregarious people, which I think makes it easier for us to do what we do. And I think the fact that we tend to recruit people who legitimately care about people makes the job a lot more effective, because it's not something we have to do. No one can tell you to be nice. No one can make you be nice. So I think customer service, internally and externally, and I hate words like that, but I mean with one another and with the folks that we get to work for, I think that, to me, and I'm not discounting 1500 or 1710 or incident command or high tangle rescue or any of that stuff. I mean, I think all of it's amazing. I always laugh when I hear somebody say, "Oh, the fire service is 150 years of service, uninterrupted by progress." I'm like, where have you been working? Because even in my short career since the 70s, I've seen amazing stuff. There was no hazmat when I came on. There was no paramedicine, was just beginning. It's been incredible. Incident command, watching that evolution was amazing. But of all of it, I think it's really important today, and we're talking about how organizations treat each other. I think we're seeing, in how you say this nicely or gently, but the rise of people desperation, and we see it in the suicides, we see it in people leaving the service, to where they don't know how much their kindness and their presence has been appreciated. I guess because maybe the organizations aren't reaffirming the fact that what they did, I don't know.
Well, there could be futility in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that our greatest advancement in my career, has been the whole customer service piece of it, whether it's amongst ourselves and amongst the great people we get to provide service to. But I think that there's something going on right now, or something more we could need to be doing right now, because we're losing people. Gentle, sweet. You read the reports, and people talk about this gentle soul that just decided to leave.
Currently, I think there's an issue, and you said it, Bobby, is that our service, like any organization or discipline or occupation, has a set of boundaries. I think the boundaries are pretty easy to manage as a boss in the fire service, mostly because of the background of the people. In other words, the people who come to you have been really socialized by their families, and they're typically very responsible people. I think that they understand and they fit into the kind of the occupational boundaries. But I think what you're seeing, and we're seeing it all over, is that there are boundaries that they have in their personal life, and a lot of them have to do with addiction. Hate to say it. And their behavior boundaries that hurt the individual. Now, indirectly, they'll hurt the organization because they're part of the organization. But honestly, and I was a fire chief longer than most people ever get to be, we didn't have a lot of behavior problems. Whatever you asked firefighters to do, you had a spirited discussion, and you had a lot of fun hanging out with each other. But we did all the things we've talked about together here today, and the forever that we've talked about. Now, they were mischievous, and they had fun, and they could entertain themselves in a stuck elevator and all those kinds of, yeah, that's right, yeah. But they were a joy to manage. The problem was they went home in the morning, and then they had all the wear and tear of their life, and that affected them in a personal way that just simply had a huge impact many times now on their welfare and now their survival. And you see that in a lot of things today. I read it the other day, there are more deaths in this country from suicides than there are in automobile accidents. And you're thinking, what, there's 14 veterans commit suicide a day?
14 to 22.
Yeah, and you're thinking, you can't mentally catalog that or make sense out of it in the process.
Right, and what's significant is that they do it when they come
home. That's right, yeah. Well, but I think that and this certainly, I know we're going to talk about challenges. One of the challenges is how do you create in an organization bosses, and let me say that on every level, a task level, a tactical level, a strategic level, how do you have bosses that are equipped, experienced, have a frame of reference simply to help the other humans in that organization that are under their care? In other words, if you're a company officer and you have a crew, how do you somehow connect to those people in an everyday way? Nothing's any more powerful than what we do every day. And simply to say that this person is equipped to somehow support the people who work for them. And we've laughed about it, cried about it through the years, is you see a lot of occupations who really are attracted to the work that they do, and they absolutely hate where they do it. And that's a horrible dissonance in that person. In other words, to say, I love the activity, I can't survive the environment that I'm in, doing the work in the process. And so, and you talk about customer service, and customer service in a fire service is a difficult thing. If you look at, you ride around on Big Red and you do emergency medical service, which we all do now, is mostly mental health support. A minority of what we do really involves the technical or literal part of emergency medical service.
The text would say real medicine.
Real medicine, yeah, that's a good way to say it. The rest of it is what you are, you are the responder of first resort and last resort. You're first out the door, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're the last one because there's nobody else who's going to come, and they call you. And organizations, and I think we are behind that power curve to say, how do we support the humans that are riding around on these red trucks?
And I think we're starting to see, we're talking about challenges in the fire service now, but I think we're starting to see the evolution of the fire service into a much greater awareness that the things we're seeing and delivering service to on the outside are inside as well. I mean, we would go to people who are alcoholics, who are drug addicts, who are dealing with mental health issues, whether it's depression or bipolar or whatever. They're inside as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being depressed does not mean you can't be a firefighter. There's ways to deal with it. Right. And we're learning more and more about how that's affected by diet, how it's affected by light, how it's affected by the simplest things. And you said it, you know, boss school, if it exists at all in most places, is nothing. It's filling out paperwork, it's how to handle the disciplinary process, and by that they don't mean how to show folks how to be responsible and self-disciplined, they mean how to punish people, you know, or how to punish people at different increments so that they can move them through the system without lawsuit, and you hate to be that cruel about it, but no one's telling people how to, you know, give that secondary praise, how to talk in front of someone about them to someone else, because almost nothing's more powerful than that. But we don't talk about those soft skills. We're just starting to value them.
It's a lot easier for me to punish. If I'm your boss, it's a lot easier, really, and a lot quicker and a lot more convenient to punish you than it is to listen to you. It takes a lot less effort from me.
A lot less threatening, too.
Yeah.
Because the person you're punishing may be right, or may be justified,
or I have to listen to what's going on in that person's life, and they don't need to be punished. Probably what they need is assistance.
Well,
boy, how's that one?
Well, it's like a line we've got the other day from my boy who said, if you don't know what your people do and what they're going through, you know, if the boss isn't connected to know that this guy might have a disabled kid at home, or a wife who's ill, or lost her job and now they're down to just his income, those soft skills are, I think, I see it, and I see a growing awareness of it. The peer support unit out of Illinois, which I can't tell you how honored I am to be associated with these kids. Yeah. They're really building programs that are about connecting people honestly. In other words, yeah. it can't be superficial. It can't be, oh, it's time for your bi-weekly meeting. It's, no, you got to be connecting every day.
Well, that's the everyday thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you have to really be willing to do it.
Most of the challenges that we see, a huge part of the answer is send the bosses to school. Just send the bosses to school. Don't. If you want to talk about customer service, let's say to begin with, send the bosses to school. If you want to talk about safety, send the bosses to school. We were just talking about the dynamics of design and fire apparatus. Send the guy who writes the specs on fire truck, get into a cab that has 11 inches to sit in. Now, send him to school.
Make him put his 14-inch butt on that 11 inch.
Okay, yeah, and then send him to some kind of an experience where he learns more about human factors engineering. Right. In other words, there are engineers who study the way we do design and manufacturing and technology to facilitate helping humans, the way they move, the way the kinesiology, in other words, the human dynamics of using that piece of equipment, whatever it is. And you look at how convenient things are being built today, and we have some pretty awkward stuff. I mean, again, send the bosses to school in the process. Send fire chiefs to school. Now there's a revolutionary, dangerous area. Yeah,
well,
I better be quiet here.
I remember the troops used to be nervous when I used to, we used to do the IMS symposiums for years, and they would always be like, wait, when I come back, oh God, what's the new idea now?
Because you went to school. We went to school.
Right. What's Spock coming back with now? He's gonna, when you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that we should probably have schools in relationships, in maintaining healthy relationships. We ought to have some kind of training, if you will.
We're going through an interesting experience in evidence-based operational development in the process, and it's in the most difficult let me call it, cultural area that we have, which is our tactical operations. Our tactical operations are probably more critical to us than any other single thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
it's the fun part of our work.
It's the sacred part of what we do, and it has to do with firefighting. Let me just say that.
And when it talks about legitimacy, it's where we define legitimacy.
That's right, yeah. And a lot of other things, yeah, absolutely. Why don't we apply that same science-based approach to different activities like relationships? In other words, there are social scientists who study relationship dynamics. And I'm fortunate, and you know her. I'll brag about my granddaughter Alana, who is a doctoral behavioral health specialist. It's interesting for me to go to school talking to her about, let me call it the scientific, although she's a very practical person, the scientific background of relationship dynamics, the process, human dynamics, motivational dynamics, personal profiles, treatment ways, treatment methods, treatment modalities, as they call them, and so on. In other words, she studied it clear through a couple of layers of graduate school. And she's very conversant, very natural to her just to explain to you this is what's going on. You and I have had those discussions with her.
Sure.
And I remember once here, just in the recent past, the three of us were having lunch and we were talking about thoughtfulness.
Mindfulness, sure.
Mindfulness. And it was interesting to listen to the two of you because you know a lot about it. And she had never mentioned it to me before, but she had studied it and it had been part of her educational doctrine and so on. The two of you are very conversant in it. Shouldn't we integrate some of that into leadership? To say, think about what you're doing simply in a thoughtful, rational, humanistic kind of a way? I mean, yeah.
Well, you started off by talking about the fact that the tactics are doing evidence-based, and it's where we gain our legitimacy, but too often people think that you should be George Patton then, because Patton had a mission, he understood tactics, wasn't great with people.
To say the least.
Yeah, it was not his strong suit.
That's right, yeah.
But his business was killing people. We don't do that.
And he had a war.
And he had a war.
And a war changes the requirements.
Right, and he, God bless him, he did a wonderful job. He was, very effective at what he did, and spent his whole life readying himself for that moment. And we always, one of the things we always do foolishly is we impose our current set of values, mores, principles, understanding of things on people in the past who don't have access to those. He might have been a different man had he lived today.
That's right. Yeah.
In many ways.
Right, yeah.
He may have hugged the soldier he slapped or the soldiers he slapped. But that notwithstanding, we've got to work where we are today, and I think that it's great to be tactically competent. I think it's absolutely critical that you're tactically competent, but I think you need to be tactically competent on an interpersonal basis as well. And we were discussing the story, the chief was telling me a story about a friend who recently had some medics come to the house and treat his wife, never once made eye contact with him. But pretty interesting comment for someone to make.
Why did the waiter last night have eye contact with us? He was very personable.
Yeah.
No, a waiter who I
Yeah, he's a great guy.
great guy.
Yeah.
So you expect that of a waiter? You don't expect it from a paramedic?
Yeah, right.
Who has a pretty advantaged job.
Right.
Yeah, and we love him to death for it. He happened to be a guy.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're thinking.
Who's manipulating your wife.
Shouldn't he go to human? Shouldn't his training include some human interaction? Yeah, you'd think. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not very complicated, but yeah.
And that may be the biggest challenge facing the fire service today. I think that that may be it. I mean, that may be it. Developing that next level of interpersonal skill, and I think that it's not something. T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, said a really great quote one day. He said, 9/10 of tactics are taught in books and are learned. He said, but that elusive 1/10 is like that kingfisher flashing across the pond. And that comes from experience and intuition and wisdom and reflection. And he said at the moment, the real test of a general is in the moment being able to do that. I think it's the same with interpersonal stuff. There's that second in time where, you know, it can't be, well, Tom, I've been reviewing your file and I see you've done many good things, but, you know, everything, the whole lead
Forget
is,
about
it's
the
the old
front.
sandwich nonsense. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, we got to throw that gibberish out and start anew, I think. In the next segment, I want